Welcome to reading 8.5 on due diligence of terms and business activities. So here we're going to be reviewing the terms that are included in the limited partnership agreement for a private fund structure like a private equity or a hedge fund. So we're going to be looking at things related to fund governance and the structure of the fund, and some of the terms like redemptions and subscriptions that are included, and fees. So already important terms that the investors should review. So here we do sort of treat this a little separately from the other reading, which was on operational due diligence, but it is very often considered really part of operational due diligence. And in addition to the terms, we're also going to look at some of the business activities that should be reviewed as part of the due diligence process, specifically related to continuity planning in the event of a disaster and then disaster recovery. Okay, so as we mentioned in the other reading where we looked at operational due diligence, we went through the different steps. So you start out by collecting documents, of course, then you analyze them, then you go on the on-site visit, and then obviously a number of steps follow that. And so here we're looking at that first step in the due diligence process, which is collecting that data. So obviously the whole purpose of collecting the data is so that it can be reviewed by the investor to try to make an assessment of the operational risk associated with that particular fund that they're reviewing. So what are potential losses that may occur related to operations? What are exposures that they may have? And again, here we're looking at either just mistakes being made that cause issues, or sort of intentional, sometimes intentional things being carried out that again can result in losses. Now, in terms of the different types of documents that are collected, they can be broken down into three categories. The first are legal documents, then financial documents, and then finally IT, information technology. And then who are these documents collected from? So the key sources of these documents are the fund managers themselves, the service providers that work for the particular fund, and then obviously any regulatory filings as well. So that's where a lot of that information and those documents will come from. Now, one thing we talked about in the previous reading was this notion of issues related to document collection in the context of whether it's better to do an on-site visit with a manager or a desk review, and there were sort of pros and cons to each. But one of the advantages, as we mentioned before, of an on-site visit was that on-site you can actually see some of the documents that were not allowed to be provided outside of the office. And so this is speaking to kind of those issues that specifically related to collecting documents. So number two is exactly that, not taking documents outside of the fund office, and so that being an issue. So what are ways that investors who are carrying out operational due diligence can get around that? So one is to review the documents at the fund office. In other words, you do an in-office, an on-site visit. And the second one is to basically collect what they call compromise documentation. So instead of getting the exact document that you want, you may, for example, get a sample. Instead of, for example, being able to take the entire compliance manual of a particular fund, you might get the table of contents, for example, or an executive summary, something like that. And then the first issue that's mentioned here with respect to collecting documents is that because we're in a private universe with respect to these funds, there's no standardization of many things, particularly even with the name of document. So one fund might call a document one thing, another fund might call it something else. And so investors essentially need to sort of work around that in some way. And so they suggest two ways of doing that. One is basically, talking to the fund manager, to the GP, the general partner, and basically saying what specifically they want the documents for, and then the fund manager can say, oh, this is what we call it.